Hey, fellow G and Tears, those of us like our spirituality with a twist. I was afraid I was going to be a little bit rusty on that one, Daniel, and fuck that up again, but I didn't.
You're good,
Got
bro.
that tagline out perfect.
You got it down.
We haven't recorded in a couple of weeks. I'm coming out of retreat mode, so we'll see how I sound. I had a really good retreat, so that's like still maybe I'm still in retreat mode, and we'll see what that does to an episode of our recording.
Yeah.
But while I was on retreat, I was definitely thinking about this episode. It was something that we had talked about pre-retreat, and the idea was to talk about kind of the coda, the conclusion of our 9 things that can fuck up your life. And you had this really interesting idea about, well, what if you just can't get on the path or something? The path or can't get on the path. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was just a really interesting thing. I've wondered about that a lot too. So I was thinking about it on the retreat, definitely, and thinking about this episode. But as you and I talked about pre-mic beforehand, maybe it would make sense that you just kind of give your idea of that, right? And then
Yeah.
we'll start from that because you had a real interesting idea in mind for sure.
Yeah. And of course, not of course, but as usual, our minds are aligned, but at different times, but then simultaneously, so
And it was trippy because I was like reading about ground path result, just coinky dinky on
yeah.
the retreat. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what we've been wanting to talk about.
Yeah. So, okay. So we've been, for probably an inordinate amount of, an inordinately long amount of time, I've been beleaguering on these, 9 obstacles that I label different things because they touch on different aspects of life. So, really for the bulk of this year, really, this has been the theme of what we've been doing. And we've had some other guests on here and there, but this has basically been what we've been talking about is these sort of obstacles in the way that are coming out of this, book, The Teachings of Chung and Le. And so we've come to the conclusion, we've sort of finished all the obstacles, but there was one more idea that I had that wasn't really listed. And so these obstacles are talking about what can derail you. Now, what could derail you from getting on the path, or what could derail you while you're on the path? I don't know. We could just call them, opportunities for derailment, regardless of where you're looking at your situation, right? And what do I mean by being on the path? Well, this is exactly kind of what we wanted to talk about. And we've been wanting to talk about this, and we have in previous episodes, but we're going to put some specificity to it, right now. So in Buddhist teachings, they kind of have these, there's always stages. They're very logical. They love to lay things out so that you can follow along. But we've talked about, it's been a couple of years, Eric, since we've talked about this, but they call this ground path result. And, from my understandings, ground path result is kind of like the ways in which you will move towards enlightenment. So that's the easiest one to discuss. Enlightenment, that's the result.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so that's 1/3. Now we got 2/3 left to talk about, right? Ground is sort of all of the things that are currently habituated in your life. So all of the situations that you have, your work, your love life, your family life, we can call it your genetics, your ancestry, your comings and goings of your daily life, whatever that might be, what you're into, what you like, what you don't like, what you're ignorant of, all the things, right? The psychological states, finances, all of these kinds of things. But really, it's more geared towards, like, we can say, I don't want to say spiritual perfection. I'm going to say, like, empowerment, self-empowerment, soul empowerment, something like this, making yourself, a more compassionate being, however you want to look at that. What were you
I
going to
don't
say?
want to like kill your flow on it,
You're
but
good.
I mean, you want to go forward or can I drop a
No,
thing?
do it.
So what occurred to me with this, my mom was having a colonoscopy.
Nice.
And I was writing up these notes as I was thinking about my mom's situation. My mom is fine, fellow G in tears. But she was a little concerned about it. But as I was sitting there in the hospital, I was going, okay, ground path result, ground path result. And the one thing I wanted to add to it was sometimes, like, if you want to get real, Asian thought about this, you could
Yeah.
say this could be like the 3 treasures are kind of the ground too, from a Taoist point of view,
You
just to
gotta,
get a little bit of that kind of stuff.
we gotta
So
explain what those are.
yeah.
Okay.
So sometimes Chinese medicine folks who are listening will have some familiarity with this, or Taoist people. When they talk about the 3 treasures, they say this is what you kind of have almost from like the moment of your conception,
Yeah.
where you have what they call the Jing, or the essence, which is kind of your underlying genetic inheritance and the constitution of your body that grows from that.
Yeah. Like your
Like
DNA, chromosome type things.
Yeah. And then like certain acupuncture channels and certain parts of the system that really strongly grow out of like to form the core of your physical constitution of who you are, right?
Yeah, what do they call that? Like the way in which that the fetuses develop from, like endo, ecto, I can't remember all the
Yeah, yeah,
terms.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
You know,
mean,
but
sometimes we'll talk about like, yeah, major of these deeper acupuncture channels that kind of reflect that, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So if people are interested in this from a Taoist point of view, you could sometimes talk about the eight extraordinary vessels, which are not acupuncture channels that go to organs, but are kind of like deeper in the core of the body,
Hmm.
right? Um, and they have cool names like the conception vessel and the governing vessel and things like that. But anyway, so that's kind of like the Jing part, one of the three treasures, and then you have your Qi, which most people are familiar with the energies of the body, right? And then you have your Shen, which is kind of like your mind, your consciousness, your even all the way up to your spirit. So you can make it like a three treasures thing. That's a kind of a way to talk about it too. I mean, you agree with that, right, Daniel?
Yeah,
That could
yeah, yeah, totally.
so the circumstances of your life you're talking about, the karmic circumstances are part of the ground.
Hmm.
Talk about that way. I also thought it would be good just to remind about like the five aggregates in Buddhism too,
Yep.
right? Which is another way to think about a similar idea, which would be the form aggregate of who you are, your physical body, kind of like that Jing idea. Um, but Jing and Qi, those kinds of things. And then the rest of them are a little bit more psychological, like your emotional makeup, your intellectual makeup, and your concepts, your deeper drives and goals, and then eventually like the foundational parts of your consciousness or something, right? The
Hmm.
patterns that are really deep in your Shen. So it's kind of like the five aggregates. So we've done things on that too. So I was just, it's cool the way you did it too. I totally agree. I hadn't thought of it that way. The circumstances of your life are the ground, but
Hmm.
then these are kind of like the ground of your being almost or
Ground of
something.
your, yeah, the ground of your being.
Yeah,
Yeah,
of your being as an
yeah.
individual. And it's cool that they call them treasures, right?
Mm,
Because they're valuable, right? And it's really making up the point of like, this is a valuable thing to have a life, a human life to work with. So it's a very positive view in some level, right? You got this
yes.
thing that you can do something with this.
Yeah.
So, opportunities, don't waste them, but it's based on the idea of like a treasure, an opportunity that you had to do something great with yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the way that I kind of look at it, because I'm, practical in many senses, is it's like you are going to build something from IKEA, which requires generally a PhD in engineering. Um, but you have the ground is like it's the pieces of material that are required to build the thing. It is also the intelligence that it takes to build the thing. It's the house that you build the thing in. It's the tools that you have to build the thing. The building of the thing is the path,
Mm-hmm.
and the result is what you get when you're done. And
Then
so
you have a Skullnurger or something. I'm trying to come
that's
up with something Scandinavian sounding.
you have a
You like a
Flupentopper.
shelving unit.
Yeah, that's right. You have a chair.
Yeah.
Um, but so that's the ground, right? It's all the pieces that are so, there for you. Those that's the potential,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 I hear what you're saying. Mhm.
And then the path is the way through. That's the whatever it is that you're studying, that's the philosophy that you're using, that's the meditative techniques that you're using, that's the sort of taking your life as the teacher, taking teachings from wherever they come, whether it be from your experience, whether it be from a book, whether it be from a person or a song or whatever it is, right? Absorbing, learning, but then also transforming them because it's moving you further along the path. It's moving you further along the way to where? Towards the result.
Mhm.
And so as we're talking about, these 9 things that could fuck up your life, well, what do we consider your life? Your life is the path. Your life,
Yeah.
that's the way, right? And that
So in that sense, it's cause and effect, really. Yeah, it's very logical from what you're saying, very
Mhm,
practical. It's like, okay, here's the ingredients. Here's your three treasures. Here's your five aggregates. Here's the karmic factors that, are kind of built around the life that you got. This is what you got. That's the ground.
mhm,
What are you going to do with them? That
mhm,
becomes your path, right?
mhm,
And it's going to
mhm.
produce a result. It's just going to do it like automatically, kind of, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because whatever you put in is going to be it's going to be the path,
Right. And I guess if
right?
we're
Yeah.
gonna use the IKEA analogy, that piece of furniture is going to be built. Even if you build it in your sleep, you're going to be a sleep builder, not a sleepwalker, but you're building it. It doesn't matter. Even if you don't want to build it, it's getting built. The question is, are you going to shape it intentionally or not? That's the question in my mind.
It's very interesting because, we were talking about Carl Jung a lot last year, right? We did a lot of these
Yeah.
episodes where we talked about relationship things, but we also had a lot of Jung stuff in there. And he makes that point. This is going to
Mm.
be go to this is going to go to chairness no matter what.
Yeah.
So is it going to be a rough ride to chairness, or is it going to be a more smooth ride to chairness?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
What's the ride going to be like? Because the ride's going to go to the same place anyways. I don't know if, like, in the Buddhist world they always say it that way, that the chair is the guaranteed result at the end. I don't know. That's an interesting question. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with both of those ideas on a certain level, to be honest. That everyone's going to get enlightened. Is it going to be a rough ride or an easy ride? You could think that, right? And I got no issue with that. But I don't know if they always talk that way. And
No,
it
I don't think
raises that
so.
interesting question of, like, are you going to get a chair at the end, or are you just getting a bunch of like scrap shit that's like put together into some rando pattern?
That one, that's what I'm
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah. It's an
Yeah.
interesting question, right? It kind of is like, the metaphor is a good one. It kind of assumes at the end it's supposed to be a chair. Okay.
Right.
Maybe it's supposed to be enlightened at the end if we want to talk that in the biggest
Yeah.
picture way.
Yeah.
But sometimes if you just go like just based on cause and effect, whatever you're going to run these ingredients through is going to produce something at the end just by cause and effect.
Yeah.
And is it going to turn out like crappy?
Yeah.
Or is it going to turn out to be something that, is a delicious thing with good plating, and like
Right.
on British Bake Off, they would give you a handshake and 5 stars or something. I don't
British
know.
Bake Off.
I had to watch it.
Oh yeah.
My son was obsessed with it.
Never even heard of it.
So people who know British Bake Off,
Okay. All
Daniel
three.
has no fucking interest in that whatsoever.
I don't like baked goods and I don't like
British reality shows.
yeah, there you go.
In any case, I mean, it's interesting in that the point would be, regardless, something's going to happen. It's going to be a path no matter what.
Something's gonna happen.
It's going to
Correct.
be a path. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I guess the lead, that is like the uber long preamble. Um, what I wanted to kind of like discuss was like, okay, so everybody has a ground. You don't need to do anything to have a ground. That's already there. That's there. But and we're talking about obstacles. And again, the way that you and I talk about it is you're saying what we've been talking about, over the last few months, which is um some of these kind of like things that are like, the need for food and clothing, demands from family and obligations, emotional attachments, material good and fame, inability to kind of cultivate yourself, impatience to find the right people to help you, being confused, things like this, arguing over stuff. Like these are the things that I'm referencing. I consider those to be obstacles on the path, because this is if I don't believe that you will view them as that if you're not on the path. If you're on the path, and I don't mean to be, let me also say this, I don't mean to be dualistic and saying you're either on or off the path. I'm just using that as a discussion point for how I am orienting my view, my perspective with this. That if you're not aiming for the result of, deepening of oneself, right? Or enlightenment, however you want to call this, right? Then you don't look at those things as obstacles. Those are just facts of life.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Well, those are life.
That's life. And that's life
Yeah,
anyways. That's
yeah.
those things are finna happen.
You and I are going to talk some. Okay, well, we'll see whether we agree or disagree as we go forward with this. This is interesting, but go ahead.
Yes. So
I'm
okay,
curious
so
how you're going
so
to frame
all
it,
those
like
things
from your
are
point of view
those
too.
things those things are there. Okay. And we're all going to have issues with partners, families of origin, money, being distracted by wanting recognition, so on and so forth. Fine. But I believe if you're orienting your life towards, again, enlightenment, self development, philosophical leanings, spiritual type experiences, that you can see how those can be provide opportunity for potential downfall for you to get trapped within. But again, trapped within the path, trapped within these things, their sticking point. But if you see that there is a path that you're working on, then there are obstacles on the path. And what I'm saying is that I don't even know if people are aware that there could be a path for them to follow. And therefore, for me, that would be the first and primary obstacle to get over. Now, does that mean that you have to necessarily know what you want, or that you have to follow a particular line of teaching or a particular tradition or whatever? No, no. What I'm saying is that I think on some level, you have to deeply recognize your own soul and then say, I want to connect more deeply with that. And now, whether you think that your soul is on the inside of you and you want to go more inside, or you think that your soul exists somewhere outside and you want to go there, or however you view it, or both, or none, but you, at least in my opinion, want to deepen the connection. You want to experience more of that. And then that moves you forward. That becomes your path. And then all the things that are along the way that we've talked about, those sit directly in front of you,
Mhm.
right? And so I guess what I'm saying is that, like, the result and the entrance to the path are two sides of the same coin. Because if you don't recognize on some level that you have something beyond just the aggregates, beyond just the limited life that we lead, full of all these obstacles that are also part of regular life or spiritual life, you're not going to be motivated or drawn towards the path that sees them as something in your way to learn from. They're going to just be life. That's going to be the end of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Do you
yeah,
get
yeah,
what I'm
yeah.
saying?
Yeah, let me like, okay, let me give a little bit of my thoughts on this too, and
Sure.
then
Yeah,
let's see
please.
how this harmonizes out because we're both going to come at this from our own perspectives,
Sure.
and we're going to end up saying the same thing in the end. But let's just see how this goes, right?
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
so I hear what you're saying. Let me get my 2 cents because I was like doing my colonoscopy notes, so let me jot it out.
You could just call them notes, man. You like,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a memorable day for me. I was
okay.
like, sitting there doing this thing, thinking about my mom, thinking about her life. It was funny, because at the end of the whole thing, my mom is a trooper. She's an 84-year-old trooper. So she went through this whole thing, and then she was like, "Well, take me out for Mickey D's." And I was like, "Mom, I'm not taking you out to fucking Mickey D's after this colonoscopy. I'm not doing that. Sorry, no." But we went out, we got some lunch, and it was like, take this 84-year-old lady to go home and rest. But she was like, "No, I want to go
Yeah.
out. Take me out." So I was like, "Okay, we're going out." So she wanted me to go to this cheap ass Chinese place, like the junkiest fucking Chinese food. I was like, "Mom, I'm not buying you this fucking food." I went in the place and it was like in a strip mall, and like, there were like folding tables that they were making the shit on. I was like, "Mom, I'm not, you just had this colonoscopy. I'm not feeding you this stuff." So we eventually found the spot. But we spent the whole day talking. And by the end, my mom's having some cognitive problems. There's some worry about dementia with her. But we spent the day together, and I was like, "Mom, you're very sharp now because we're talking a lot." And in the end, we had a really, really deep conversation that was kind of ground path result driven things about her life and how I felt about things. I talked with her a lot about how I saw my life and the choices that I made were my choices on path.
Mm,
And so it all ended up kind of fitting together in a logical way because I had done these notes in the morning, and then we had this really deep conversation, and it was my mom at her best, kind of, right? Especially because my mom isn't always at her best now. It was actually kind of a moving day. So I'm remembering it in the context of that. It was my mom sharp.
yeah.
That was my mom in her best moments. My mom could go to this place throughout my entire life, and she went there, and it was like, okay, we're going to talk about the most deep things,
Mm,
right? The most deep and honest things. And we did, you know. but this is it. These are the most deep and honest things, right? If you take this shit seriously, right? You know, um, so okay, so hence my referencing, referencing back to the time I wrote the notes. But so to my mind, when I was jotting this down, I was thinking, well, what are these 9 things, right? And I was thinking about the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama will always make this point in Buddhist Tantra, which is kind of my home base now, right? Zen background, Taoist background, this Buddhist tantric background, and I got a love for Kabbalah and Sufism, as we would say, we have these spiritual loves.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
in the tantric Buddhist world, they really say there are 2 things have to be overcome, right? If you think about obstacles, and they call them mundane conceptions and mundane appearances, right? Those have to be overcome. This is like the heart of the Buddhist tantric path, to overcome mundane conceptions and mundane appearances. And to me, as I was thinking about what these 9 things are, they're the mundane conceptions and appearances. That's what they are for me. And it really struck me that that recognition is important to me. So I don't know if that's framing it exactly the same way you're framing, but I see these things as the mundane appearances,
Sure.
as the mundane conceptions. And those are the things that are going to obstruct you. And so I see that the goal is to transcend these things.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you could frame these things as the materials of your life somehow. But I don't think that's the way I want to do it, or I don't think that's right exactly. I think what they are is the mundane ways that the world can be seen that have to be transcended. And so these things either have to be transformed into something that's not mundane, right? Or they have to be transcended completely, and then you're kind of flying above them. But I see it through that context. Does that make sense to you too?
Mm-hmm.
And so the problem, the way I see it, and we don't have to all agree on this, or you and I don't have to agree on this,
Yeah.
but I see these things as similar to the way I think about other episodes we've had. Like when we talk about like Wilhelm Reich, he talks about the emotional plague, people getting stuck in the ideas of the world that hold them down. I think those are the mundane conceptions and appearances. And then in a certain sense, I see those as indistinguishable from these 9 obstacles if you don't do anything with them to transform them. Or in Carl Jung, he uses this phrase, the Procrustean bed, that people get stuck. Procrustean
Right.
bed, we had it some episodes ago. It's some old Greek myth.
Yes.
There's this evil son of, I think he's a son of Saturn. So a bastard, an asshole. And he ties you to this artificial bed, and you're stuck there. And if you don't fit, he cuts off parts of your body till you fit into this thing. So it's basically getting jammed into something, right, that doesn't fit who you are. And
Mhm.
Jung talks that way, right? And so I see these 9 things as that. Or in Carl Rogers' world, I see these as the conditions of worth that we sometimes use, right? Where the world forces you to take on these things, and now you're saddled with them, and they fuck your shit up, essentially, right? And they block you. So I tend to think of it like that these things are the mundane materials that get kind of forced upon people,
Sure.
right? And it fits into me with that kind of whole way of thinking. I was listening to an interview around the time I was doing these little notes too. I was I think it might have been even when I was driving out to get my mom. He was talking with this existential philosopher, Paul Tillich, who's not a super famous person, but in the little existential world, if you know anything about existential philosophy, he's a Christian existential philosopher. And so it was Carl Rogers, famous psychologist that we've talked about in different episodes, and then Paul Tillich, and they're talking back and forth. And Rogers framed it in this interesting way. I'd never heard him say this before, but he said, if you want to get people to become who they really are, their authentic version of themselves, you need to give them clinically conditions of freedom. And I was like, he never says it that way, but he said it that way in this interview. And I was like, yeah, that's what it's supposed to be.
What
If you
does that
think,
mean?
well, I think he normally talks about conditions of worth that push people into confused versions of who they are. The outside world fucks with their head,
Mm-hmm.
scrambles their brains. They get diluted ideas about who they are, and they never tap into that soul you were talking about, right?
Right.
They never get a chance to find that thing.
Sure.
So, and then he says the conditions to improve that is you have to get people in a clinical setting where they're accepted, where they're understood, and where there's honesty. He sets these three criterias, but he flipped it this time. And he said, no, what you have to do is you have to put people in a condition of freedom, meaning unobstructed, unobstacled. People have to have a certain kind of freedom to be able to find out who they are.
Mm,
Right. And that it really struck me as I was putting the notes together. I was like, yeah, that fits into this somehow for me too. It was one of the great quotes there. He also said, agreeing with Tillich, he said the anti-moral act, the act that's not a moral act, is the one that stops people from realizing who they are.
mm,
That's the crime. That's the immorality, comes from that. That's the bad act. So I was like, yeah. So and again, I don't know how this sounds to you, but as I was going through it, I was like, yeah, this is how I'm thinking about these things. These are the Procrustean bread, the conditions of worth, the emotional plague, right? I'm framing it like that. Now we don't have to agree. I'm totally fine if we don't. But I was like, yeah, I think that's how I want to think about this,
mm,
and if, in terms of teaching people about this as we go forward and whatever way we do that,
yeah.
I kind of tend to think of it that way. In Buddhism, they sometimes use this phrase concealer truths, that the truths of the world around you that everyone agrees on, but they're not
Mm,
really true. They're in a certain sense, they're lies. They're just what people agree on, right? And so when I look at these things, I'm like, yeah, those are kind of like the obstacles to the way I'm framing it for myself, at least.
yeah.
Um, and I got some Zen stuff, but let me get your response to it first as I find my little Zen things on this because it's kind of interesting. I don't know if that vibes with you or not. I mean, if it doesn't, it's cool.
Yeah, I mean it does in some level, and then it's like, slightly or like how you see things on a different level. So it's not about vibing or not vibing. I feel like it's a slightly different perspective from the outside in, because a lot of what you're saying is like society pressures on one hand, and I
Yeah, yeah,
think and I think what I'm saying is sort of like the inside out. Not that you're saying everything is only outside in, you are, but I'm just
yeah,
saying
yeah,
like
yeah.
a
No,
lot of what you're also saying is like there's societal impact, and I'm not really addressing that. I mean, I am in a sense, but not in the crux. And the crux of my argument is not that. The crux of my argument is that like the initial obstacle before you even get to those other obstacles is you finding your own Shen, your own soul, and then deciding that that's a thing that you want to orient your life around.
So, I mean, isn't it like, okay, so if we just take American society, tell me what you think.
Let's do American society
When you were
first.
talking
We're
about that.
getting we're getting to Venezuelan society third.
Yeah, I'll see what deep opinions I have about
Yeah.
that. Tell the Venezuelans about Venezuela.
That's right.
Venezuela splain. So I mean, I was just kind of going like, when you got to that part, I hear what you're saying. There's going to be an obstacle to that right off the bat that's going to be sociocultural, like immediately, because for the people who believe in that kind of thing, they're Christian in America. And Christianity, for better or for worse, has tended to like get more and more narrow in what it means in America. It's almost owned by a group of people who are kind of like the more far right Christians, to be honest. Those are the ones that kind of won, you know? So I don't think it had to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
And but it seems like those are the folks that won. Do we kind of agree on that? When you go to most people, I think Christianity became this more kind of niche thing that's more owned by the more conservative voices.
Yes, but I think I'm talking about what you're saying is true again, looking at it from a societal perspective, and you're not incorrect about it. But I think I'm just talking to people as individuals, regardless of what their ideology might be, whether it's Christian or something, whatever, regardless of how you see that, even if, and we're gonna, we don't often talk about this, but it's probably going to take multiple lives. I guarantee it's going to take multiple lives to do. So even if in this lifetime you happen to be, I don't want to say saddled with, that sounds heavy. um, but even if in this lifetime you happen to be born into a family that has very strong religious views that may or may not completely vibe with you, or you don't question it, but you are still studying a philosophy, orienting yourself around good, compassionate living in a sense. I don't know that is necessarily like off the path, if you will, if I can say it that way. You're just doing it maybe in not your own most authentic way without those things, but those two things might be running kind of parallel at the same time. I feel like though you're going to have to eventually accept whatever path that you are on as your own. And if that means that you follow a different one than when you were born into, then you have to do that. Or like in the case of maybe Thomas Keating.
Mm.
So there was a book that I read, Running Towards Mystery by Tenzin Priyadarshi, who is he was at one point at least a professor of ethics at MIT. Very good read. And he was on with Robert Thurman on one of his podcasts, which is how I heard about it. And so then I read this book, and he was at MIT, and Thomas Keating did the Lord's Prayer
Mm.
at some beginning of one of his talk. He gave a talk, an ethical talk, and he opened with that. And Tenzin Priyadarshi, again, the author of this book, Running Towards Mystery, said that he felt that was one of the deepest recitations of any teaching that he's ever experienced. And he ran away from his Indian family to study Zen Buddhism when he was like 9. You know,
Okay.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, um, and what he was reading the Lord's Prayer, which has been said, many people have heard this in many different settings for a very long time. I don't, it's a nice prayer, but I don't consider it like a super deep thing. But he said, by the way that he said it, the way that he shared it, to him touched his heart. You know what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
so I'm using that as a sense that says, even if you're in a path that you maybe necessarily didn't choose, if at some point you consciously adopt it, well, then now that becomes your path. And if you're still oriented towards, you know, communing yourself with the Holy Spirit or whatever your aspect of your Shen that you like, I still consider that okay. I still consider that
Yeah.
like,
I'm not being like anti-Christian or anything. I'm just more like, I've been wondering what the mystery is of this, because it gets to, this has been going on for a long time for me too, thinking about this question. How do you get people on a spiritual path in this culture at all?
yeah,
Like, how does it fucking happen? And the reason I brought it up wasn't to like, be negative about Christianity.
no,
I was
yeah,
more like, it was more like, if you're kind of a person in American culture, you're kind of given two options, right? One is sort of a more of a like a scientific materialist way of looking at the world, right?
fine. Mm-hmm.
And then you just don't think you have a soul, like you just don't think there's anything beyond you than that's like kind of like a biological robot, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we love that. I mean,
Yeah,
we talk about biological
a
materialism all the
biological
time.
robot.
Yeah.
Or if you look around, if you're just like a person, you're going, well, I guess there's some religious people, but I'm not into them either because they seem to be kind of conservative, you know? And they want to like pack the Supreme Court in the United States with people to like make the laws. And I don't want to be around that, you
Right.
know? And it like, whether this is right or wrong, I mean, we probably don't think it's right, but that's just how this shit turned out. Right. And so, I mean, I look at it even with my own kids. If I talk with my son, he's like, I don't like Christianity. Boo, boo, hiss, And I'm like, okay, well, you don't know anything about it, But he's like, well, it's just all the conservative people. And I'm like, well, you're not wrong. That's the only thing he knows about it. You know what I mean? But otherwise, it's just this other point of view. And like, that's more the biological robot thing. So then how did you even get started? You know?
I mean,
But
I
yeah.
think I mean, for me, you can only talk to individuals.
So I think what we're real quick, and let me interrupt, but I think what we're doing is we're disagreeing maybe a little bit on how strong conventional truths are. I tend to think of conventional truths being really, really strong for people and that they have to be strongly overcome. And maybe you're more mellow on that point than I am. And I might be more harsh on that point, which is fine.
well, I guess
That's kind of what I sense is like I think that might be just a different way that we're coming at that.
what I'm saying is that like I agree with you. I'm just like you cannot. They're not, those things are not overcomable only within yourself can you overcome them. So whoever it is that I'm gonna be meta for a moment. Whoever is listening right now is listening to us. You know what I'm saying? I know that's an obvious statement, but it's true. And so if you're listening to this, whenever you're listening to this, whether it be when it comes out in September of 2024, or you're doing this at some later date in the future or in the past, I don't know, who knows, fuck time, you know. But like, or the future past, um you're hearing it. And so the conventional truth still exists and you're listening at the same time. So the only person who ever has to overcome this conventional truth is you. You, Eric, being Daniel, the one who's talking and listening, and the person who is listening to us. That's the only relationship that is ever going to exist in this conundrum that we find ourselves in this podcast. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
that's how I see it.
So, I mean, I agree with you. I think this is a question of like how each individual has to come to terms with what it is that is making up their own internal psycho-emotional intellectual complex. Right.
Yes.
But it's sociocultural too. Okay, the
Yeah.
other thing that hit me with this, here's my little prop. It's funny because we were just talking about the Little Prince earlier today with my son and my daughter.
Yeah.
So the bookmark of this thing is the Little Prince. It's like we were just literally talking about this, but I'm using it as the bookmark for this old book.
Readings in Comparative Religion.
Yeah, from DePaul University in Chicago. I had a girlfriend that, like, back in the day, I think we might have talked about this in our TMI episodes, but
Yeah.
this is how
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
first got introduced to Zen from this essay. She had taken too many classes. She was like, "Can you do this essay for me?" I was like, "Okay, fine. It's on Zen. It's on some interesting sounding shit. I don't know anything about this. I'll do it." So I read this essay in my shitty apartment in Bridgeport neighborhood of Chicago, and it's by uh, Masawa, who is a Japanese philosopher, Abe Musawa, from the Kyoto School. And I read this thing, and I was like, it hit in this deep way. So let me drop this on you, and we'll see how this connects to you. For how we're talking about this, Daniel, you tell me what you think. But I wanted to give this thing from Rinzai, who's one of these really famous Chinese Zen masters before it was even Zen in Japan, when it was Chan in China. And
Jaina.
yeah, that's the Trump version of China. China, China. Okay. So here's what Rinzai says. He says, encountering a Buddha, killing the Buddha. Encountering a patriarch, killing the patriarch.
Mhm.
Encountering an arhat, killing the arhat. These are all just different versions of Buddhist practitioners, right? And then he says it like he goes a farther way. He says, encountering mother or father, killing mother or father. Encountering the relative, killing the relative. Only thus does one attain liberation and disentanglement from all things, thereby becoming completely unfettered and free. And the
Mm,
free thing is interesting because it goes back to what Rogers was saying. Somehow you have to get free
yes.
to begin to find this. So what's the point here? Are you really going to kill your mom? No. It's a metaphor.
No, because she's been training jujitsu for the last 3 years, dude. She's totally got me dominated.
She's been whooping your ass for years.
Yeah,
Why would you beat her now?
Yeah, no, exactly.
You'll end up in one of those Gracie holds on the ground
Yeah.
with your femur popped out or something. Um, we've talked to your mom on this podcast. I would not want to wrestle your mom
No.
on the road.
Although
No, it's one of these.
I am gonna wrestle a sumo wrestler this coming weekend, so I'll tell you about that
Are
next
you
time.
really?
Yeah, I got his ass, bro. He's 570 pounds, but he ain't got shit on me. You know what I mean? I got buck 70. We're good.
Okay, well, we're gonna hear the report next week.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
be around to give this report.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
So anyways, what's being said here? Obviously, the idea is you're killing the concept of these things, right? It's a whole bunch of concepts. And part of these things are even the obstacles of the family, the obstacles of your relationships in the present or something. Those things have to get killed, right?
Yeah.
And not in any literal way, obviously, but you're killing the idea of it, right?
Mhm.
So they don't dominate you because those things have to get gone. Now, the trippy thing in this essay, and it worked out well because we went to the Jesus thing a little bit here too, is this Japanese philosopher also pulls these things from the Gospel of Luke, And he says, isn't this the same point that's being made from more of like a Western religious point of view or Western spiritual point of view in these kinds of quotes? I never read these before, but it says from the Gospel of Luke, it says, Jesus says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot become my disciple. Mic drop. What's being said there? Are you really supposed to hate those people? Obviously, no. Right? But the point is, to the extent that there are things in your mind or things in how you approach life that become these 9 things, they got to go.
They gotta go.
They got to go. And then, so I was like, when I first read this, I was like, what the fuck? I never heard this in CCD class. My Sunday school classes, which were on Monday nights for me, to be honest, and they were just a chance to meet girls who went to schools that weren't your own school. So we weren't taking our religiosity too seriously, but if they read this stuff, my jaw would have dropped. So it goes on, and he says also in the Gospel of Luke, he says, truly I say to you, there is no person who has not left house or wife or brothers or parents or children for the sake of the kingdom who will not receive manifold more in this time and in the ages to come eternal life. So it's the same vibe. He's saying, yeah, this is part of what spirituality is, probably in some root way, and we can see if we vibe with it or not together. But I was like, yeah, that's sort of how I think about it on some level. And I probably was influenced this from the very beginning when I started doing this Zen thing, back in the day. I was like, yeah, there's a point that's being made here. If you get the underlying point, the underlying metaphor, they're basically saying, yeah, these things that can constitute life, quote unquote, can become these 9 obstacles, and they got to go, and it fit into the Joseph Campbell thing for me too, as I was reflecting on this, because
Joey C.
Joey C.
Man, classic, man.
Classic G&T, Joey C, Bobby T. With Joseph Campbell, great expert on myths and philosopher, right?
Yes.
He was like presenting, I was saying with my mommy, watching his program on public television. And he got to the point of talking about the Buddha and the temptations of the Buddha. The last one was, you got to do these things.
Yeah.
These 9 obstacles, the mundane concerns and appearances. And the Buddha's like, no, they got to go. Right. And so I was like, yeah, I don't know how it is for you or for other people, but I just wanted to share it because that's sort of how I see it. And in a certain way, it's balled together with, I think, the psychologists I happen to like, which are kind of the ones that are a little bit more radical,
That makes sense. Yeah.
where they're like, it's Reich or it's Carl Rogers or Carl Jung, where they're going a little bit more radical.
Yeah.
They're making a little bit more of a radical proposition. And, then you get this terminology of like, isn't this kind of like something that should be gotten rid of, like a disease, right? These obstacles are things that are obstructions. Now, I don't know if like obstructions just on the path themselves or before you get on the path, but what hits me is like, if you don't do anything, they're going to become the path.
Yeah.
That's what
yes, for sure.
This will be the path.
Yeah.
And then just like running something along a conveyor belt, when you run it through, ping, the result's going to come out at the end.
Yes.
And for me, like, just watching people around me over the course of my life, like, I don't think the results turn out that great. I just don't think they do. So, what I find in Reich or Jung or Rogers or these Buddhist ideas, this essay by this, Japanese philosopher talking about these Zen things, or in the Jesus quotes too, it's like those are hard words, but I think they're being said from like a compassionate place, if that makes sense, right? They're saying like, listen, if it is ground path results, and if you don't do anything to transform these things or transcend these things, that's going to be the path. It's just going to spit out a result that's probably going to be mediocre or, maybe worse, just depending on how it gets spit out at the end.
Well, let's just say maybe it's not the chair that you were hoping to build.
Yeah.
Because I think I think the important part, at least for me, is that you're approaching these things consciously, that you are as they come up. I mean, not always in every moment are you aware, oh, this is part of obstacle number 7. Here it is. I found it. I got it now. Like, no, you're not. But
Well, maybe
after,
you should be.
maybe, but at
Yeah,
least
maybe.
after the situation has transpired, then you can transmute it and go, oh, that seems like that might have been something.
Mhm.
That process, that situation is not here to stomp me out and put out my flame and end all of my hopes and dreams. It's a transformational aspect of my path. It was here for me to learn and to overcome and to kill, essentially, or let go, or release or whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah, yeah.
so that kind of mentality, that you're approaching it with a sense of awareness, and maybe even as you're doing it, then changes the way that these obstacles reside in your life, because they're not here to stomp you out. They're not here to snuff you out. They're here for you to overcome. They're here for you to learn from. They're the coals on your fire. They're the logs, right? In your
Mhm.
flames. And they become important. They're part of your path, but they're part of your path consciously, as opposed to the aggregation of things that just occur. You know what I'm saying? There's a, like, the silver lining kind of idea.
Yeah, 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 yeah. How the toxins get transmuted to become the nectar or something like that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Um,
We
well,
probably
maybe
should.
wrap up in a minute or something.
Yeah.
Maybe the
Yeah.
closer on this for me, and I got like, maybe we'll do one more little thing on this, but because it's a deep subject matter, and I think it's really important one to share, right? Like this is about as deep as you get, I think. Is there's the kind of a Buddhist thing of like Buddhas know the results of paths. It's one of the things that's talked about. The more you get along in your spiritual kind of development, in terms of helping others, the more you can go and say, there's a result to paths, and this path is going to go to this result, right? So, and I think I used to think of that when I first heard that as some deeper metaphysical thing, like they can see the secret karma of everyone, right? But as I've gone along, I also can see, yeah, there's a very like, I don't want to say more everyday, but like very practical level of that, that is just like, yeah, if you're on a path that's going to consist of mundane conceptions and appearances, it's going to produce a mundane result.
Okay.
That's a problem.
Sure.
That's a problem. And it's not just a problem, it's a problem in the sense that like maybe you won't get enlightened, maybe you won't get moksha, but it's also a problem in the sense of like it just doesn't tend to turn out that happy. And if part of the goal, certainly for I think both of us in doing this podcast and thinking about spiritual stuff at all, like what are your goals in doing this? Which is one of the things I tried to jot down as I was putting these notes together. Like, what's the purpose of this? And part of it is to overcome unhappiness, right? You want spirituality's job in part is to like make people happy,
Right.
is to overcome unhappiness, right? I mean, as far as Buddhism goes, Buddha says that is like my goal is to overcome this dissatisfactoriness, this
Mm-hmm.
unhappiness, right? And to replace that with positives.
Yeah. Yeah. Contentedness.
But like I think even you could jack it up when you get to like Buddhist Tantra or some of these other
Yeah. You could
Taoist,
definitely check.
like bliss,
Yeah.
like it's supposed to get you to something awesome,
Yeah.
to end
Yeah.
it on a positive note. So
Yeah.
I think it's worthwhile kicking around a little bit more if you're open to it, maybe a short little closer episode on it, and then we can wrap it. But I mean, I think this whole idea of ground path result, really thinking about that, I think that's just one of the most fucking genius ideas people have ever come up with.
Mhm.
Right? Let's talk about this. What is the ingredients? What is the path? Look around you,
Mm.
and you want to know what the result of a path is going to be? Look at the other people around you who are on it.
That's
They're going to
fair.
tell you the
Yeah.
result. I was looking at like Padmasambhava, the great Buddhist tantrika, and he said something like, if you want to know what your future life is going to be, look what your life is now. It's going to be that.
Mm,
You know, if you expand that idea out, you want to know what your result of your path is going to be. Look at the people around you. That's going to be the result,
mm,
right? And if you're on like kind of like, I mean, the sad thing coming from this place of not being a smartass or something, but from a place of something we all wrestle with. If you find yourself on kind of this mundane path, it's going to produce kind of a mundane result. And you could just look around and see, well, this shit doesn't look that great.
right.
People aren't as happy as they should be, right?
That's true. Yeah. The
People
people are.
aren't like, it's just not the case. Like if you look at it honestly. And it's funny because, you know, I had this realization back when I was a kid in 8th grade. It hit me. Maybe we did this in the TMI episode too, but it was my 8th grade teacher, Miss Jacobs, very nice lady, and she could see something was bothering me. So she said, let's talk. And for some weird reason, she had me come to a class where she had a bunch of students and she sat me in the front like I was going to talk about shit in front of this group of students. I was an 8th grader. It was a bunch of 6th graders. I was looking at her like, what do you want me to say? But she pressed me and she said, well, what's bothering you? And I think she thought I was going to say something about bad times at home and these kinds of things. And that was all true. But my answer was, man, you adults look fucking miserable. And I don't know what to do about this. I mean, I don't know what to do. And she was like shocked by the answer. She just kind of recoiled back and was like flummoxed as to what to say because there wasn't a fucking answer.
Right.
And when I studied with the doctor I studied with from China, he came to the United States and he was like, I don't understand. These fucking people are so unhappy.
Mm,
It was his kind of generalization. So it's not good enough. You
right.
know,
Right.
it's
I
just
agree.
not good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it could be better. So then we do G&T to talk about this, to try to encourage each other to go, hey, this shit can be better. If we can get out of these 9 obstacles and get a path that doesn't consist just of this shit.
Agreed.
All right.
Agreed.
Anyways, that's my
Yeah.
preaching at the end.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. It's a good place to stop. Eric,
Okay, cool.
yep. As always, thank you for being here, my friend.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks everybody for listening. Like, comment, subscribe, leave a comment in the YouTube channel. You know, smash the like button, or I don't know. I said it already. Do your thing, man. Like, you know, support our work if you want to. We don't advertise. You know, everything we do is legitimate, real. We stand behind our work and our words and the things that we're trying to share with people. Um, you know, for those of you who are still listening at the end, you're in the 5% of people who have a long enough attention span to listen to something for, you know, 45 minutes or whatever it is. And we appreciate all the love and feedback. So, you know, if you're on Instagram, hit us up, Gin and Tantra Podcast, or hit us up at the email if you want us to go over something or you want to give us a shout out. You know, we love to get feedback from folks. ginandtantra@gmail.com. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.